My name is Diane. I'm 58 years old, and the day I lost my son was the day my world stopped turning. I can still remember the way Mark used to light up a room when he walked in. He was my only child, my pride, my reason for waking up each morning. After my husband passed away from a heart attack 15 years ago, it was just the two of us. Mark was my anchor. We leaned on each other, and in many ways, he became both my son and my best friend. He grew into a kind, hard-working man who cared deeply about others. He'd stop by my little house every weekend just to have dinner with me, insisting that Mom's cooking always beats takeout. I used to laugh at that, pretending not to blush with pride. When Mark married Sabrina 5 years ago, I wanted to love her. I really did. She was beautiful, sharp, and confident, the kind of woman who always looked like she had somewhere more important to be. From the very beginning, there was something cold about her. She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. She treated me politely in front of Mark. But when he wasn't around, her words turned sharp. She'd say things like, "You really should let Mark live his own life now," or, "Don't worry, Diane. We'll make sure you're comfortable when the time comes." It always felt like a veiled warning. Still, I ignored the feeling. Mark loved her, and that was enough for me. I didn't want to be the bitter mother-in-law. I told myself that Sabrina just needed time to warm up to me. When they bought their own home across town, a big, modern place that made my little house look like a dollhouse, I was proud of them. Mark had worked hard for everything he had. I'd raised him to be humble and generous, and he never forgot where he came from. But everything changed the night of the accident. It was raining hard, and Mark was driving home from work. I got the call around 10 p.m. A stranger's voice on the other end said there'd been an accident on the highway. My knees buckled before they even told me he hadn't made it. I remember screaming his name into the phone, as if that could change the truth. At the hospital, Sabrina was there, dry-eyed, surrounded by her friends. She hugged me briefly, then pulled away like I was contagious. The doctor offered his condolences, but his words sounded distant, muffled. I was staring at the sheet-covered body on the bed, unable to breathe. That was my boy, my Mark, the one person who had never left me. The funeral was a blur of faces, flowers, and murmured sympathies. People told me to stay strong, but I could barely stand. I tried to talk to Sabrina, to find comfort in shared grief, but she brushed me off. She took over every detail of the service, choosing the music, the photos, even what I was supposed to wear. I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength. After the funeral, she disappeared for a few days. I thought maybe she needed space. I stayed in Mark's old room, going through his childhood things, holding his baseball glove, smelling his old jackets. I was desperate to feel close to him, to believe he was still somewhere near. When Sabrina finally came by, she didn't say a word about how I was doing. Instead, she walked through the house like she was inspecting it. She glanced at the photos, the furniture, even the curtains. I felt uneasy. I tried to offer her tea, but she refused, saying she was only there to talk business. I didn't understand what she meant until she handed me a folder and said flatly, "You'll need to start packing." My heart dropped. I asked her what she was talking about, but she just gave me this icy little smile. "That house you live in," she said. "It was under Mark's name. And now that he's gone, I'm the one handling everything." I stood there, numb, trying to process her words. She told me I had no legal right to stay there anymore and that I'd need to move out by the end of the week. My voice shook as I begged her to reconsider, reminding her that it was my home, the one Mark grew up in, the one his father built. But she didn't care. She said coldly, "You'll get nothing, Diane. It's all mine now." The look in her eyes wasn't grief. It was triumph. A week after the funeral, Sabrina shows up at Diane's door with a look that makes Diane's blood run cold. Sabrina stood on my doorstep with an envelope in her hand and venom in her eyes. When I opened the door that morning, I wasn't expecting company, certainly not her. She looked immaculate. As always. Not a hair out of place. Makeup flawless. Her eyes were cold though. Empty. I could tell before she even spoke that she hadn't come to offer condolences. She held out a manila envelope and said, You'll need to sign these papers. Her voice was flat, like she was ordering coffee. I hesitated before taking it, my fingers trembling. Inside were legal documents, property transfer forms, eviction notices, and a letter from an attorney I'd never met. I skimmed the first few lines, and my stomach turned. The house I'd lived in for more than 30 years was listed under Mark's name. I was being asked to vacate. This must be a mistake, I said, my voice cracking. This is my home. Mark would never. Mark isn't here anymore, Sabrina interrupted sharply. And everything he had now belongs to me. You're just a guest, and your stay is over. The words hit me harder than I expected. I stared at her, trying to see any hint of humanity in her face. There was none, just that smug, almost satisfied smirk. Sabrina, I said softly, trying to appeal to her decency. I've lost my son. Please don't do this right now. I just need some time. She crossed her arms, tilting her head like she was bored. You've had time, it's been a week, you need to move on literally. Tears welled in my eyes, but she didn't flinch. I begged, told her I had nowhere else to go, that this house held every memory of Mark and his father. But she just looked around the living room like she was already imagining how she'd redecorate. This place is outdated, she muttered. I'll probably sell it, maybe tear it down. That's when I realized she wasn't just cold. She was cruel. When she left, I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes of my son's things, sobbing until my chest ached. Everything around me, the pictures, the furniture, the smell of Mark's favorite aftershave still lingering in the hallway felt like it was slipping away. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside. When I opened the door, I nearly screamed. Movers were hauling my furniture out onto the lawn. Sabrina stood by the truck, clipboard in hand, directing them like a general. What are you doing? I shouted, running down the steps. Finishing what you wouldn't, she said calmly. You didn't leave, so I'm helping you. I tried to stop them, but she had already hired muscle big men who wouldn't look me in the eye. They loaded up my furniture, my boxes, my memories, like they were trash. My wedding photo fell out of a box and shattered on the driveway. I knelt down to pick it up, my hands shaking, and Sabrina just sighed. Drama doesn't suit you, Diane, she said. It's just stuff. Just stuff. That stuff was my life. When they were done, the house was empty. I stood there, looking at the bare walls, feeling like I'd been erased. Sabrina handed me a single suitcase, the one she'd packed for me herself, and said, You can keep that. Out of pity. Then she walked away without another word. I spent that night at my friend Margaret's house. She'd been a neighbor for decades and welcomed me with open arms. As soon as she saw the state I was in, she sat me down, made me tea, and let me cry until I couldn't anymore. You can stay here as long as you need, she said, but you're not giving up that house without a fight. I didn't have the energy to fight. Not then. I felt small, powerless. Everything I loved had been taken from me in the blink of an eye. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I whispered a prayer to Mark. I told him I missed him, that I didn't know how to keep going. The pain of losing him was unbearable, but the betrayal from his wife made it even worse. The next morning, I went out to get some air, just to clear my head. As I walked back toward Margaret's porch, I noticed a figure approaching a courier, holding an envelope. He asked for me by name and handed it over. I opened it, my heart pounding as I saw the letterhead. It was from a law firm. Just as Diane resigns herself to losing everything, a letter arrives from her son's lawyer summoning her for the reading of his will. Hook. When I saw the lawyer's letter, my hands trembled so hard I could barely open it. The envelope was thick, expensive, the kind that carried weight before you even read a word. My name was typed neatly on the front, Mrs. Diane Latham. Beneath it, in bold print, the return address of a law firm I didn't recognize. Langford and Associates. For a long moment, I just stared at it, afraid of what might be inside. Then I slowly tore it open. The letter was brief and formal. It stated that a will reading for my late son, Mark Latham, would take place at the firm's downtown office the following Monday morning. It requested my presence as a named party of interest. My breath caught. A named party of interest. I wasn't sure what that meant, but for the first time since Mark's funeral, a tiny flicker of hope stirred inside me. Margaret was sitting at the kitchen table when I told her. She was folding laundry, but she stopped mid-fold and looked at me with raised eyebrows. "Diane, that could mean he left you something," she said gently. "You have to go." "I don't know, Margaret," I said, shaking my head. "Sabrina will be there. I can't face her again." Margaret's voice hardened. "You have to, honey. Don't let that viper scare you off. If Mark mentioned you in his will, you deserve to know." Her words settled in my chest like a quiet push of courage. When Monday came, I put on my best dress, navy blue. Simple but dignified. I brushed my hair and applied a bit of lipstick, just like Mark used to tell me to do when I needed confidence. "You look strong, Mom," he'd say. I tried to channel that strength now. The law firm's office was on the 15th floor of a tall glass building downtown. The waiting room smelled like polished wood and expensive coffee. When I walked in, Sabrina was already there. She was wearing a sleek black suit and sunglasses, even indoors. She glanced at me, smirked, and whispered something under her breath. I couldn't quite catch, but her tone said it all. Contempt. Langford, the lawyer, was a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. He greeted us both courteously and gestured for us to sit down. His assistant handed each of us a folder, then left the room. The moment the door closed, I could feel Sabrina's impatience filling the space like smoke. "Can we just get this over with?" she said. "I already know how this goes." Mr. Langford gave her a polite but firm nod. "We'll proceed in order, Mrs. Latham." He opened a thick file and began to read. He outlined Mark's estate, the house, the business shares, his bank accounts, and a few charitable donations. I listened quietly, my heart pounding with every word. Sabrina leaned back in her chair, her legs crossed, looking utterly confident as if she were waiting for a performance she already knew the ending to. Then Mr. Langford's tone shifted slightly. "Mark made several specific bequests," he said, turning a page. "One to the Children's Health Foundation, one to his business partner for outstanding work." I braced myself, certain my name wouldn't be mentioned. "And one to his mother, Mrs. Diane Latham." For a split second, I thought I'd misheard. My head jerked up. "What?" Sabrina's smirk faltered. "That has to be a mistake," she snapped. "He wouldn't." Mr. Langford raised a hand to stop her. "It's not a mistake." Mark was very deliberate in his wording. "Mrs. Latham, you are the primary beneficiary." The words hung in the air like thunder. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. Sabrina's face went red with fury. "What do you mean, primary beneficiary?" she spat. Mr. Langford adjusted his glasses. "It means your late husband left the majority of his estate to his mother, not you." Sabrina slammed her hand on the table. "That's impossible. I was his wife." Mr. Langford looked unbothered. "Nevertheless, those were his wishes. And there's more." He reached into the file and pulled out a USB drive and a sealed envelope. Mark left behind a personal message, a video, to be viewed at the conclusion of this reading. Sabrina's voice shook with rage. "I don't want to see anything. This is ridiculous." I sat perfectly still, my heart swelling with both disbelief and grief. My son, my sweet Mark, had thought of me. He'd protected me in the only way he could after death. Mr. Langford clicked play on a small laptop. Mark's face appeared on the screen, smiling gently. My breath hitched as I heard his voice. "Mom, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone. I wanted to make sure you're taken care of." Sabrina leapt to her feet, knocking over her chair. "Turn it off," she screamed. Mr. Langford didn't move. I watched, tears streaming down my face, as my son's recorded words filled the room. Mr. Langford announces that Diane is not only included in the will, she's listed as the primary beneficiary. Sabrina's smug smile froze in place the moment she realized I was getting everything. The air in that office turned heavy, like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Sabrina stood there, trembling with fury, her eyes darting between me and Mr. Langford as if she was trying to find a loophole in reality. The lawyer stayed calm, flipping to another page in the file as though he'd seen scenes like this 100 times before. As stated in the official will, Mr. Langford said evenly, Mark Latham bequeathed the majority of his assets, including his home, his business shares, and personal savings to his mother, Mrs. Diane Latham. Sabrina's voice cracked like glass. This is insane. He was my husband. He would never choose her over me. Mr. Langford didn't flinch. Mark was of sound mind when this will was signed, witnessed, and notarized. It was updated 2 months before his passing. I could barely breathe. My son had rewritten his will recently. Why, Mr. Langford reached into the folder again, pulling out a flash drive. Mark also left behind a video message for clarification. With your permission, Mrs. Latham. I'll play it now. I nodded wordlessly, my heart pounding. The screen came to life again. And there he was, my boy. Sitting in his office chair. Smiling gently at the camera. He looked tired, but his eyes were warm. Full of love. Mom, his voice said softly. If you're watching this, then I'm sorry. I didn't want you to have to hear things this way. But I need you to know that I love you, and I'm grateful for everything you've done for me. You've always been there, always believed in me even when no one else did. He paused, exhaling heavily. Then his tone changed. Sabrina, if you're here too, I want you to understand something. I've seen how you've treated my mother. I've seen the disrespect, the coldness, the greed. You told me she was a burden. You told me to put her in a home and I couldn't. I wouldn't. She's my mother. Sabrina gasped. That's not true, she shouted. But no one was listening. Mark continued, his voice firm. I don't know what will happen after I'm gone, but I want Mom to be safe, to have peace, to stay in the home she built with Dad. That's why I've made sure she's taken care of. It's what Dad would have wanted. The screen went black. For a long, silent moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. Then Mr. Langford cleared his throat. That concludes the video message. I'll file the will in court immediately to finalize transfer of assets. I sat frozen, tears streaming down my face, my heart breaking and healing all at once. My son had protected me even from beyond the grave. Sabrina, on the other hand, lost all control. This isn't over, she yelled, slamming her hands on the table. You can't take everything from me. Mr. Langford met her glare without blinking. Mrs. Latham, your late husband's will is legally binding. You may contest it in probate court if you wish, but I assure you, the documentation is airtight. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. You think you've won, don't you? You think this makes you better than me? I swallowed hard. No, Sabrina. I don't think I've won anything. I just wish Mark were still here. That seemed to make her even angrier. She let out a bitter laugh. You'll regret this, Diane. I swear you will. With that, she snatched her purse and stormed out, slamming the office door so hard the glass rattled. Mr. Langford sighed and leaned back in his chair. I'm sorry you had to endure that. Your son truly loved you. You should be proud. I nodded, unable to speak. I left the office with the documents in my hand and Mark's words still echoing in my head. That night, I sat alone in the empty house Sabrina had stolen from me just weeks earlier. The lights flickered on for the first time since I'd been thrown out. I walked through each room slowly, running my hands along the walls, whispering, I'm home, Mark. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace settle in my chest, fragile, but real. Then the phone rang. I hesitated before answering. There was no caller ID. When I picked up, all I heard was breathing slow, angry breathing. Then a voice I knew too well hissed, You haven't seen the last of me. The line went dead. That night, Diane receives a threatening voicemail from Sabrina promising she hasn't seen the last of her. The sound of Sabrina's voice in that message made my heart race with fear and anger. For a long time after that voicemail ended, I just sat there in the dark, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. That voice, that venom in Sabrina's tone, it cut through the peace I'd just started to rebuild. I replayed the message over and over, hoping maybe I'd misheard it. But it was clear as day. You haven't seen the last of me. There was something about the way she said it, cold, deliberate, with a strange kind of satisfaction that told me she meant every word. I barely slept that night. By morning, I decided to tell Margaret everything. I walked across the street to her house, still clutching my phone. She poured me coffee and listened quietly as I played the message for her. Her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. That woman's unhinged, she said. You need to go to the police, Diane. This is harassment. I don't want to cause more trouble, I whispered. She's grieving too. Even if she's... Stop right there, Margaret interrupted. Grief doesn't excuse cruelty. Or threats. You're not doing anything wrong by protecting yourself. She was right. So, that afternoon, I went down to the local police station. I showed them the voicemail and explained the situation. The officer on duty took notes and said they'd document it as a harassment complaint. He advised me to change my locks, install security cameras, and avoid contact with Sabrina altogether. When I returned home, I called a locksmith immediately. Watching him change the locks gave me a small sense of control, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I also installed a camera above the front door and one in the backyard. The technician helped me set up an app on my phone so I could watch the feed anytime. That first night back in the house felt strange. It was quiet, too quiet. I kept expecting to hear Sabrina's car pull up outside or footsteps on the porch, but the night passed without incident. Over the next few days, I tried to keep busy. I went through Mark's belongings, organizing his files, donating clothes, and sorting photos into albums. It was painful, but it helped me feel close to him again. Every now and then, I'd catch his scent lingering on one of his old shirts, that mix of cedarwood and cologne, and it would hit me all over again that he was gone. One evening, I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard a faint noise outside. A scraping sound, like someone dragging something across the gravel driveway. My stomach dropped. I froze, listening. Then I heard it again, closer this time. I quietly walked to the window and pulled back the curtain just an inch. In the dim light of the porch, I saw a shadow move, tall, thin, deliberate. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone to call the police, but before I could dial, the motion sensor light flicked on. The yard flooded with brightness, and there she was, Sabrina. She stood there, glaring straight at the house, her hair wild, her face twisted in rage. For a split second, our eyes met through the window. Then she turned and ran into the darkness. By the time the police arrived, she was gone. They searched the property and found footprints near the window, but nothing else. The officer took another report and promised to increase patrols near my street. Margaret stayed over that night, insisting I shouldn't be alone. We slept in the living room with the lights on. I didn't get a wink of sleep, just listened to the wind against the windows and the faint hum of the refrigerator, waiting for any sound that didn't belong. The next morning, I went back to see Mr. Langford. I told him everything, the voicemail, the break-in attempt, the fear that had settled deep in my bones. He listened carefully, concern written all over his face. "I'm glad you came," he said. "And I'm glad you documented everything with the police, but there's something else you should know." He opened a drawer and pulled out a small envelope, sealed with Mark's handwriting. My breath caught. "This was left with your son's file," Mr. Langford said. "He instructed me to give it to you only after the will was read. It's personal." I took the envelope with trembling hands. My name, Mom, was written on the front in Mark's familiar cursive. Mr. Langford hints that there's one more sealed letter from Mark, meant only for Diane's eyes, and it could change everything. My hands shook as I opened the envelope Mark had left just for me. I sat there in Mr. Langford's office, staring at the envelope like it might burn me if I touched it. My son's handwriting, that strong, confident cursive, stared back at me. The sight of it made my chest tighten. It was like seeing a ghost. For a long moment I couldn't move. Finally, Mr. Langford gave me a small, understanding nod. "Take your time, Mrs. Latham," he said quietly. I slid my finger under the flap and unfolded the letter inside. The paper smelled faintly like cedar, Mark's office scent. His words began simply, "Mom, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I hate that you're going through this, but there are things I need you to know, things I couldn't say out loud." I swallowed hard and kept reading, my eyes blurring with tears. "You were right about Sabrina." I didn't want to believe it. But over the past few months, I started noticing things. Money disappearing, strange transactions. She'd get angry when I asked questions. I tried to fix things quietly, but it got worse. "She's not the person I thought she was, Mom. She's been using me, using the business, and I think she's planning something." I felt a chill run down my spine. My hands gripped the pages tighter. "If anything happens to me, I've left something behind for you. Go to the First National Bank. There's a safety deposit box under my name, number 2147. I added your name to the access list a few weeks ago. The key is taped to the back of this letter. In that box, you'll find what you need." At the bottom of the page was his signature, and taped neatly behind the paper was a small brass key. My throat tightened as I whispered, "Oh, Mark." Mr. Langford leaned forward. "Do you know what he might have meant?" "I think so," I said softly. "I'll find out." Later that afternoon, I went straight to the bank. The clerk at the counter verified my ID and Mark's records, then escorted me into a quiet room with rows of metal boxes lining the walls. My heart pounded as she unlocked the compartment and stepped back, leaving me alone. Inside, there was a flash drive and a small stack of handwritten notes. I took them out carefully, my fingers trembling. On the top note, in Mark's handwriting, were the words, "For Mom, trust no one but Mr. Langford." I plugged the flash drive into one of the bank's private computers. There were several video files and a folder labeled Evidence. My pulse quickened as I opened it. There were scans of bank statements, email exchanges, and photos of documents that clearly showed Sabrina moving money out of Mark's business accounts into a secret one under her maiden name. In one of the videos, Mark sat at his desk, looking tired but calm. "Mom," he said into the camera, "I'm recording this because I don't know who else to trust. Sabrina's been hiding things from me, big things. I think she's been draining the company, maybe even setting me up for tax fraud. I can't confront her yet. Not until I'm sure. But if something happens to me, you'll know what to do." Tears streamed down my face as I watched. He'd been trying to protect me even while his own life was unraveling. When the video ended, I carefully gathered everything back into the box and went straight to Mr. Langford's office. His eyes widened as I laid the flash drive and letters on his desk. "This is significant," he said slowly. "If this evidence is authentic, it changes everything. It means your son's death may not have been as simple as it seemed." The words made my stomach twist. I didn't want to believe that, didn't want to imagine Sabrina being capable of something darker than greed. But deep down, I knew. Mr. Langford advised me to keep quiet while he verified everything. "Don't confront her," he warned. "If she's desperate, she could be dangerous." I nodded, though fear was already curling through me like smoke. That night, I sat in my living room with Mark's letter on my lap and the flash drive beside me. The house felt both comforting and eerie, full of his presence, but shadowed by the truth I'd uncovered. I read the letter again and again until the words blurred together. Then, just as I started to stand up and turn off the lights, I heard it, the sharp, unmistakable sound of shattering glass coming from downstairs. My heart lurched. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. Someone was in the house. As she closes the letter, Diane hears glass shattering downstairs. Someone has broken into her house. I ran downstairs and froze. Sabrina was standing in my living room, wild-eyed and furious. For a split second, I thought I was dreaming. The sound of breaking glass still rang in my ears, and there she was, Sabrina, standing amid a mess of shattered window pane. Her hair wild, her eyes blazing like a cornered animal. She looked nothing like the perfectly composed woman I once knew. Her voice came out low and trembling with rage. "Where is it, Diane?" she hissed. "Don't play dumb with me, I know you have it." I stood perfectly still, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my throat. "Sabrina," I said quietly, "you need to leave. I've already called the police." That was a lie, but I was about to make it true. She took a step closer, glass crunching under her shoes. Don't lie to me. Mark left you something, I know it. That lawyer of yours thinks he can keep secrets. But I'm not stupid. I took a small step backward, trying to reach my phone on the table. You broke into my home, I said, my voice shaking. If you don't leave now, shut up, she screamed, her face twisting with fury. You think you've won, don't you? You think you deserve his money? He was my husband. Everything he had should have been mine. Her voice cracked, not with sadness, but with obsession. I'd never seen hatred like that in someone's eyes before. Sabrina, I said softly, keeping my tone calm. I don't want anything that isn't rightfully mine. But you need help. This isn't the way. She laughed, sharp and hollow. Help? You think I need help? You old fool. You have no idea what I've lost because of you. As she moved toward me, I darted sideways, grabbing the phone and pressing the emergency number. My hands shook as I whispered, "Please, someone's in my house," before Sabrina lunged forward. She knocked the phone from my hand, sending it clattering across the floor. "You're not calling anyone," she snarled. I stumbled backward, tripping over a rug, my body slamming against the wall. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me, but underneath it was terror. She started pacing, running her hands through her hair, muttering to herself. "He wasn't supposed to change it," she said. "He promised me. He said everything would be mine. And then you got in his head again. You always do." Her words made something click in my mind. Mark had said in his letter that Sabrina was planning something. Maybe this was it all along. I managed to edge toward the kitchen, keeping my eyes on her. "Sabrina, please, let's talk. Mark wouldn't want this, don't you dare say his name," she screamed, slamming her hand on the counter. "You don't get to talk about him. You took him from me." Her words hit me like a punch. "Took him from you?" I repeated softly. "You think I wanted him gone? He was my son." For a moment, the fury in her eyes faltered, replaced by something hollow. Pain. But then it returned, hotter than before. She lunged toward me again, grabbing my arm so tightly it hurt. "You'll give me what's mine," she said through gritted teeth. "The will, the documents, whatever he left you, you'll hand them over, or I swear." Her threat was cut off by the sound of sirens outside. I'd pressed the emergency button on my security system earlier. She hadn't noticed. The flashing blue lights filled the front window as two officers ran toward the porch. Sabrina spun around, panicked. "You called them?" she spat. I stepped back, clutching my arm. "You did this to yourself." She tried to run for the back door, but the police burst in before she could move another step. They shouted for her to freeze. She screamed, thrashing as they restrained her, tears streaming down her face. "You'll regret this, Diane," she shouted as they led her away. "You'll regret everything." When the pawnee dollars to Kanger of one door closed behind them, I finally let myself collapse into the nearest chair. My whole body was shaking. I stared at the broken glass glittering on the floor, realizing how close I'd come to losing everything again. Later that night, after giving my statement, an officer told me Sabrina had been taken into custody. They said she'd be charged with trespassing and harassment. I could press additional charges if I wanted to. I didn't know what to feel: relief, anger, sorrow, maybe all of it at once. When I met with Mr. Langford the next day, I gave him the flash drive and told him everything that had happened. He looked grim. "We'll make sure this is handled properly," he said. "If the evidence you found connects her to Mark's death or the financial fraud, this could go much deeper than we thought." I nodded, exhaustion sinking into my bones. "I just want it to be over." He gave me a small, reassuring smile. "It will be soon. You have my word." For the next few days, the house was quiet again, eerily so. I tried to rest, to breathe. But just as I started to believe things were finally calming down, the phone rang again. This time, it was the police. Their tone was serious. "Mrs. Latham, we've found something you need to know about Sabrina." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" The officer hesitated before answering. "Her car's been found abandoned on a remote road outside town. No sign of her anywhere." Days later, The police contact Diane again. Sabrina's car has been found abandoned on a remote road. When the officer said Sabrina's car was empty, a chill went through me. I gripped the phone tighter, my heart pounding in my chest. What do you mean? No sign of her? I asked. The officer's voice was calm but distant. The car was found early this morning by a highway patrol unit about 15 miles north of town. The engine was still warm when they discovered it. Her purse and cell phone were inside. There's no indication of where she went. I didn't know what to say. A part of me felt relief, maybe this meant she was finally gone for good, but another part of me couldn't shake the unease creeping into my bones. Sabrina wasn't the type to vanish quietly. The officer told me they'd keep me informed, then hung up. I stood there in my kitchen, staring out the window at the rain. My reflection looked pale, tired. What are you planning now, Sabrina? I whispered to the empty room. Margaret came by later that afternoon. I told her everything. She frowned, crossing her arms. That woman's trouble, Diane. Mark's gone, the will's settled, and she still won't let you have peace. Maybe she's running. Maybe she's planning something worse. I don't know, I said softly. All I want is for this to end. To distract myself, I started to clean. I dusted shelves, polished the wood floors, and organized the old photo albums I'd been avoiding. It was strange as I flipped through the pictures. The house began to feel alive again. Mark's smile beamed from every frame, his eyes full of kindness. I realized I'd been living in fear for weeks, letting Sabrina's shadow darken everything. I needed to reclaim my life, my home, my peace. So I did something small but symbolic. I changed all the curtains and put up new photos of Mark and my late husband. For the first time in a long while, the house felt like mine again. Over the next few weeks, I tried to settle into a routine. I met with Mr. Langford regularly as he sorted through Mark's financial matters. Most of Sabrina's fraudulent activities were being traced, and the authorities were quietly building a case against her. Still, her disappearance remained a mystery. One night, about 3 weeks after the police found her car, I was sitting on the couch reading when my phone buzzed. The number was unknown. I hesitated before answering. Hello? For a moment, there was silence, then a soft, almost mocking laugh. My blood ran cold. Did you really think you'd gotten rid of me, Diane? It was her. Sabrina. Her voice was lower, raspier, but unmistakable. I couldn't speak, my throat closed up. You ruined everything, she hissed. You took what was mine. But you can't hide behind lawyers and sympathy forever. I'll make sure you lose it all, the house, the money, everything. Just like you made me lose Mark. Then the line went dead. I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. For a moment, I just stood there in stunned silence. Then I called the police again, explaining what had happened. They took down the report and promised to trace the number. When the officer called back later, his tone was uneasy. We traced the call to a prepaid phone purchased out of state, he said. We can't pinpoint her location, but it seems she's still moving around. I thanked him, hung up, and sat in the dark for a long time. My heart felt heavy with dread. The next day, I called Mr. Langford to tell him. He immediately arranged for added security. Within a few hours, a company came and installed stronger locks, a full alarm system, and motion sensors around the property. They even placed a discreet panic button by my bedside. Margaret insisted on staying with me for a few days. We spent our evenings talking about happier times, stories about Mark as a boy, memories of birthdays, laughter, and life before all the chaos. She kept saying, "She can't hurt you anymore, Diane," and I tried to believe her. A few days later, I decided to visit the children's hospital Mark had donated to in his will. It felt right, like something he would have wanted me to do. I met with the staff, learned about their programs, and even signed up to volunteer twice a week. Helping those kids gave me a strange sense of peace, as if Mark's kindness was living on through me. For a little while, things were quiet again. Sleeping better, eating again, breathing without that constant tension in my chest. It felt like maybe, just maybe, life was beginning to heal. Then, one chilly morning, I went out to collect the mail. Most of it was junk bills, a flyer, a catalog. But at the bottom of the stack was a single envelope. The handwriting stopped me cold. I knew it instantly. It was Mark's. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my hands trembling. Then I noticed something else: the postmark date. It was stamped 2 weeks after his death. My heart dropped. That wasn't possible. A few weeks later, Diane opens her mailbox and finds a letter addressed to her in Mark's handwriting but postmarked after his death. Seeing Mark's handwriting again made my knees buckle. I stumbled back into the house, clutching the envelope like it was a piece of him I'd somehow gotten back. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely get the key in the door. Once inside, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at it in disbelief. The handwriting was undeniably his, the slightly slanted loops, the strong pressure of the pen. But the date on the postmark, that was what made my stomach twist. It was from 2 weeks after his death. For a few minutes, I couldn't bring myself to open it. What if it wasn't really from him? What if this was some cruel trick, maybe even from Sabrina? But then I thought about my son, about how meticulous he'd been, how he always planned ahead. If Mark had left me something, it had to mean something important. Finally, with trembling fingers, I tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. As I unfolded it, I could almost hear his voice in my head. "Mom, if you're reading this, then something's gone wrong. I'm scared. But I don't want you to worry. I've been noticing strange things, the brakes on my car acting up, my tools being moved around when I'm not home. I think someone's been tampering with me things in the garage. I don't want to believe it's her, but if anything happens to me, please show this to the police." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My son had known. He'd sensed it. My hands flew to my mouth as tears blurred my vision. I read the rest of the letter through the fog of shock. "I've backed up everything, the files, the bank records, everything on the drive I left for you. Mr. Langford knows what to do. I just hope it's enough. Please don't blame yourself, Mom. I love you. Always, Mark." The letter slipped from my fingers and landed on the table. For a long time, I just sat there, shaking, trying to breathe. He'd been scared. He'd been warning me, and no one had listened. When I finally gathered myself, I called Mr. Langford and asked him to come over right away. He arrived within an hour, his expression serious as I handed him the letter. He read it carefully, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. This changes everything," he said quietly. "If this was mailed after his death, then it's evidence of foul play. We need to take this to the police immediately." We drove to the station together. I watched through the passenger window as the town blurred by, my mind spinning. At the station, I handed the letter to Detective Alvarez, the same officer who had taken my earlier reports. She read it twice, then looked up at me. "Mrs. Latham, are you saying your son suspected someone was trying to hurt him?" "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "He thought someone was tampering with his car." The detective nodded slowly, her face grave. "We'll reopen the investigation. This letter is enough to warrant it. You said your daughter-in-law's car was found abandoned, correct?" "Yes, 3 weeks ago." She glanced at Mr. Langford. "If she's still out there, this could be connected." They asked for the flash drive again, and Mr. Langford handed it over. The detective promised to send everything to the lab for digital analysis. I left the station feeling both drained and strangely alive, like the truth was finally clawing its way to the surface. That night, I sat on the couch holding Mark's letter. His words echoed in my head, looping endlessly. "If anything happens to me, show this to the police." He had trusted me to find the truth, and now I owed him that. Over the next week, the investigation moved quickly. Detectives contacted Mark's coworkers, his business partner, and anyone who might have seen him before the accident. They began piecing together a clearer picture, one that made my skin crawl. It turned out that the night before Mark's crash, security footage showed Sabrina entering his garage. She'd told neighbors she was just checking on something, but she stayed there for over an hour. When Detective Alvarez called to tell me that, I nearly dropped the phone. "We're not jumping to conclusions yet," she said. "But this doesn't look good for her. Especially with the evidence you found." I sat in stunned silence. My son hadn't just died in an accident, he'd been killed. Maybe not directly, but through someone's malice and greed. Days passed, and each one felt heavier than the last. I barely ate, I barely slept. All I could think about was that my son had been right, and no one had protected him in time. Then, one night, the phone rang again. It was Detective Alvarez. Her voice was calm but firm. "Mrs. Latham," she said, "we've found her." My heart stopped. "Sabrina?" "Yes," she said. "She was living under a false name 2 states over. We've taken her into custody." I closed my eyes, tears spilling down my cheeks. Did she admit anything?" The detective hesitated. "Not yet. But we have more than enough evidence to charge her." I thanked her softly and hung up, my hands trembling. I looked up at Mark's photo on the mantel, his bright smile, his kind eyes. "You were right, my darling," I whispered. "You were right all along. The police call Diane they've found Sabrina hiding under a fake identity 2 states away." When they told me Sabrina had been arrested, I finally felt like I could breathe again. For weeks, my life had been a cycle of fear, grief, and endless waiting. When Detective Alvarez called to say they'd captured Sabrina, it was as though a weight I didn't realize I was still carrying had finally lifted. I sank into my chair, clutching the phone, trying to process her words. "She was arrested in a small town outside Nashville," the detective explained. "She'd been living under the name Clara Dawson. We found her using stolen credit cards, staying at a roadside motel." The image of Sabrina, once so polished, elegant, and calculating, reduced to hiding in some dingy motel, felt surreal. I should have felt triumphant, but what I mostly felt was numb. "Did she say anything?" I asked quietly. "She's denying everything," Alvarez said. "But between your son's letter, the flash drive, and the financial trail, the district attorney has plenty. We're charging her with fraud, embezzlement, and possibly vehicular tampering pending final forensics." I thanked her, hung up, and sat there in silence. The house was warm, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors. For the first time in months, I didn't feel trapped by the shadows of what had happened. But that peace was fragile, and I knew the next storm was the trial. When the hearing date came, I dressed carefully, a navy suit, the same one I'd worn to Mark's will reading. I needed to look strong, composed. Margaret insisted on coming with me for support. "You don't go through something like this alone," she'd said, squeezing my hand. The courthouse smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish. As we entered the courtroom, my breath caught. There she was, Sabrina, sitting at the defendant's table. Her once golden hair was dull and unkempt, her face pale, her eyes hollow. When she looked at me, the hatred was still there, but something else flickered behind it: fear. Mr. Langford sat beside me, his calm presence grounding me. "Remember," he said softly, "you're not here to fight her. You're here to speak the truth." The judge entered, and everyone rose. Proceedings began with the prosecutor outlining the case, the fraud, the financial theft, the will tampering, and the evidence suggesting Mark's death was not purely accidental. Each word felt like a dagger reopening old wounds, but I forced myself to listen. When the time came for me to testify, my hands trembled slightly as I took the stand. The prosecutor guided me gently through my statement: how Sabrina had thrown me out, how Mark's will had changed, how I'd found the evidence. I spoke clearly, holding nothing back. Every word was for Mark. Then it was Sabrina's lawyer's turn. He tried to twist everything. "Mrs. Latham," he said smoothly, "you've made it clear that you and my client didn't get along. Is it possible that your grief and animosity are clouding your memory?" I met his gaze steadily. "No, I may be grieving, but I know what I saw, and I know what my son wrote before he died." There was a murmur in the courtroom. The judge nodded for the next question. Sabrina's attorney pressed on. "Isn't it true that you received a substantial inheritance as a result of your son's will, and that my client was left with nothing?" I took a deep breath. "That's true." But that was Mark's decision, not mine. He made it because he knew who she really was. Across the room, Sabrina shifted in her seat, glaring at me. For the first time, though, she didn't look powerful. She looked cornered. The prosecutor called Detective Alvarez next. She explained how the car's brake lines had shown signs of deliberate tampering, matching tools found among Sabrina's belongings. The evidence spoke louder than anyone's words could. The courtroom was silent when Alvarez finished. Even Sabrina's lawyer seemed at a loss. Finally, the judge called for closing statements. The prosecutor's voice was firm but emotional. This isn't just about money. It's about betrayal, about justice for a son who tried to protect his mother even in death. As the jury left to deliberate, Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand again. "He's watching over you," she whispered. When the jurors returned, time seemed to slow. The foreman stood, holding a folded piece of paper. My heart pounded as he read the verdict aloud. On the charge of fraud, guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, guilty. On the charge of vehicular tampering resulting in death, guilty. I let out a shaky breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Tears blurred my vision. Justice. Finally, justice. Sabrina's scream shattered the silence. She jumped to her feet, shouting over the guards. "You don't understand. You don't know what happened." Her voice cracked, desperate and furious. The judge ordered her to be seated, but she didn't stop. Her eyes locked on me, wild and tear-streaked. He wasn't supposed to die. It was supposed to be her. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My heart froze. During the sentencing, Sabrina suddenly blurts out a secret that makes the entire courtroom gasp. "Mark wasn't supposed to die, it was supposed to be you," Sabrina screamed in court. The room exploded into chaos. Reporters in the back gasped, camera shutters clicked, and the judge's gavel slammed repeatedly against the bench. But the sound barely registered in my ears. All I could hear was the echo of her voice. "It was supposed to be you." My heart stopped. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. 2 guards restrained Sabrina as she fought against them. Her voice hoarse and wild. "She ruined everything," she cried. "She took him from me. She deserved it, not him." The judge shouted for order, demanding silence, but the words were already out there, hanging in the air like poison. The prosecutor's face went pale. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "I request an immediate recess to address the defendant's statement." The judge nodded sharply and ordered the jury to step out. The guards pulled Sabrina back into her chair. She was shaking, her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her expression a mix of rage and collapse. I just sat there, frozen. I could feel Margaret's hand on my arm, but it felt distant, like I was underwater. My son had died because of me, because someone wanted me gone. When the room quieted, the judge turned to Sabrina. "Mrs. Latham," he said, his voice like steel. "Are you aware that your outburst could be used as an admission of guilt?" She laughed bitterly. "Guilt? You think I care anymore?" She turned her head toward me, her eyes sharp, almost gleeful in their madness. "He loved you more than me, Diane. Always did. I begged him to stop spending so much time with you. To let us have our life, but he wouldn't. You were always in the way. He was going to move you in with us. Said you needed family. But what about me? What about what I needed?" Her words hit like daggers, one after another. My throat tightened. "You tried to kill me?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She tilted her head, smiling through her tears. "I just wanted you gone. I never meant for him to take your car that night." Gasps filled the courtroom again. The judge leaned forward, his face grave. "So you admit to tampering with the brakes of Mrs. Latham's vehicle?" She closed her eyes, shaking her head slowly. "I didn't mean to kill him," she murmured, almost to herself. "It was supposed to be her car, not his. He changed cars last minute because yours was low on gas. I didn't know." Every word sank into me like ice water. My hands went cold, my vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I might faint. Mark had died because he was trying to help me because he'd taken my car. Margaret's arms were suddenly around me, steadying me as I started to shake. "Diane," she whispered. "Breathe. Just breathe. The prosecutor stood up, voice trembling with restrained anger. Your Honor, we request that this testimony be entered into the record as a full confession to premeditated tampering resulting in death. The judge nodded grimly. So ordered. He turned to Sabrina, who now sat staring at the floor, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Mrs. Latham, your actions caused the death of your husband. You will answer for that. She didn't respond. For the first time since all this began, Sabrina looked broken. The fight had drained out of her. She was pale, hollow, almost small. The judge reconvened the jury and allowed the prosecution to summarize the new confession. It took less than 30 minutes for them to return with a final verdict, guilty on all counts. When the sentencing was read, Sabrina didn't speak. She just stared straight ahead, tears running silently down her face. Life imprisonment. No possibility of parole. The gavel struck one final time, echoing through the courtroom. It was over. But even as I walked out into the sunlight, surrounded by reporters shouting questions, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Mark was gone, and nothing, not the verdict, not the justice, could bring him back. Outside, I took a long breath, the air sharp in my lungs. Mr. Langford joined me, his voice gentle. You did what needed to be done, Diane. He'd be proud of you. I nodded slowly, tears pooling in my eyes. He saved me, I whispered. He took my place. Mr. Langford placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. His love did that, even in the end. As we started toward the car, one of his assistants rushed up, holding a small brown envelope. This just came in for Mrs. Latham, she said. The handwriting was unmistakable, Mr. Langford's label on the front. To be opened only after justice is served. My heart thudded. I looked up at him. What is this? He smiled faintly. Mark left one final letter. I was instructed to give it to you once everything was settled. My hands trembled as I took it. What could possibly be left to say? I whispered. After court ends, Diane receives one last envelope from Mark's lawyer labeled, to be opened only after justice is served. With trembling hands, I opened the final letter my son had ever written to me. I waited until I was home to open it. I couldn't bring myself to do it in the car or at the courthouse, not with so many eyes watching. This wasn't for the world, this was for me and for Mark. So I sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd read his last letter, and took a deep breath before carefully unsealing the envelope. The paper inside was thick, expensive, just like the ones he used for his business correspondence. His handwriting flowed neatly across the page, each word precise and deliberate. The moment I saw the first line, the tears started. Mom, if this letter reaches you, then everything is over, the truth has come out, and I hope you're finally free. I didn't want you to carry guilt for what happened, because none of it was your fault. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to stifle a sob. I've spent so many years worrying about you, whether you'd be okay if something happened to me. You were always so strong for everyone else, but you never let yourself lean on anyone. I know you've lost Dad, and I hate that you might lose me too, but I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll live, Mom. Really live. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. His voice echoed in my head, gentle and certain. He always worried more about me than himself. I've made arrangements with Mr. Langford to set up a trust fund in your name. You won't ever have to worry about bills or the house again. But I don't want you to just survive, Mom. I want you to live, travel, see the places you used to talk about, paint again, fill the house with laughter, find joy where there's been pain. I set the letter down and wiped my cheeks, my hands trembling. I couldn't stop crying, not because of the money, but because of the love behind every word. If there's one thing I learned from you and Dad, it's that love doesn't end when someone dies. It changes, but it never disappears. I want you to hold on to that. Every time the sun hits the kitchen window, every time you smell coffee in the morning, I want you to think of me smiling. By the time I finished reading, my tears had soaked the bottom of the page. I folded the letter carefully, pressing it to my heart before setting it beside the framed photo of him on the counter. Margaret came by later that evening. She didn't say a word when she saw my red eyes. She just poured us both tea and sat quietly across from me. After a while, I handed her the letter. She read it in silence, then reached across the table and took my hand. "He really did love you, Diane," she said softly. "He wanted you to have peace. I think it's time you let yourself have it." I nodded slowly. "I don't know how to start," I admitted. "One step at a time," she said. "You've earned it." That night, I took a small notebook from my dresser one Mark had given me years ago and wrote down everything I wanted to do. Visit the ocean again, paint like I used to, maybe even volunteer more at the children's hospital. As I wrote, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. A few days later, I visited Mark's grave. The air was cool, and the sun was dipping behind the trees, casting long golden rays across the grass. I sat beside his headstone, tracing his name with my fingers. "I got your letter, sweetheart," I whispered. "You did everything you could to protect me. And now I'm going to do what you asked. I'm going to live." I unfolded the letter one last time, reading his words again under the fading light. Then, with a trembling smile, I placed it at the base of his headstone and whispered, "I'll carry you with me, always." The wind picked up gently, rustling the leaves around me, and for a moment, I could almost feel his presence: warm, comforting, peaceful. As I turned to leave, I felt lighter, freer, like I'd finally taken my first step toward healing. But just as I reached the path leading out of the cemetery, I heard a soft voice call my name. I froze. It wasn't in my head, it was real. Just as she starts to walk away from the grave, she hears someone softly call her name from behind. I turned around, and there stood a young woman holding a baby. She looked terrified and familiar. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. The woman looked barely 25, with chestnut hair pulled into a messy bun and eyes red from crying. The baby in her arms couldn't have been more than 6 months old. She clutched him protectively, as if afraid someone might take him away. "Mrs. Latham?" she said softly. I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Clara." Her voice trembled, but it wasn't just fear, it was something else: recognition, grief. I studied her face, searching for a reason why she felt so strangely familiar. And then it hit me. I'd seen her before, in a photo on Mark's desk. You worked for my son," I whispered. She nodded quickly, eyes glistening. "Yes. I was his assistant for almost 3 years." She shifted the baby in her arms and looked down. "This is his son, your grandson." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My gaze fell to the baby tiny hands, chubby cheeks, a tuft of dark hair that looked exactly like Mark's when he was a baby. He had the same cleft chin, the same soft expression. Tears blurred my vision. "His son?" I managed to say. I don't understand." Clara bit her lip, fighting to hold back tears. "I didn't know how to tell anyone. Mark and we never meant for it to happen. He was lonely, Mrs. Latham. Things with Sabrina were terrible. He told me he felt trapped, that he didn't recognize her anymore. She broke off, looking ashamed. "I found out I was pregnant just before the accident. My knees went weak, and I reached for the stone bench beside Mark's grave. He didn't tell me," I whispered. "He wanted to," she said quickly. "He planned to, but then the accident happened, and everything fell apart. I was terrified, Mrs. Latham. Sabrina found out I was pregnant, and she threatened me. She said if I ever came forward, she'd make sure I lost the baby. That's why I disappeared." I felt the color drain from my face. Of course she had. It sounded exactly like something Sabrina would do. Clara wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "When I saw the trial on the news, I knew I couldn't hide anymore. I had to come find you. I didn't come for money, I swear. I wanted Mark's son to know where he came from. I wanted him to know his father wasn't the monster people were saying he was." I looked at the baby again, at his tiny fingers curled around Clara's sleeve, and my heart broke open. "Can I hold him?" I asked softly. Clara nodded, her hands trembling as she passed him to me. The moment his warm little body settled into my arms, something inside me shifted. He looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. Mark's eyes. My throat tightened, and tears spilled down my cheeks. "Hello, sweetheart," I whispered. "You look just like your daddy." The baby cooed softly, reaching up to grab a lock of my hair. I couldn't stop the sob that escaped my chest. After everything, after all the pain and loss, here was a piece of my son still alive, still breathing. Margaret arrived then, having waited for me at the gate. When she saw Clara and the baby, her jaw dropped. "Diane? Who is this?" "This," I said, smiling through tears, "is Mark's son." Margaret's eyes widened in shock, then softened with understanding. "Oh, Diane." Clara wiped her cheeks again. "I know this is a lot. I don't want to cause trouble. I just needed you to know the truth. I can show you the DNA results. Mark had already signed the acknowledgement before he died. He wanted to take care of us." She pulled out a worn folder from her bag, and inside was the proof, Mark's signature, the official paternity test, and even a short letter he'd written for the child. As I read the papers, my tears kept coming. "You didn't just bring me news," I said softly. "You brought me a reason to keep going." Clara smiled weakly. "He has your eyes, you know. I've told him stories about you. About his grandma Diane." My heart swelled at the sound of those words. "You're both welcome here," I said finally. "This house, this family, it belongs to you too." Clara's lips trembled. "Are you sure?" I nodded, smiling through tears. "I'm sure. Mark would have wanted that." We stood there in silence for a moment, 3 generations, bound by love and loss as the wind whispered through the trees around Mark's grave. But even as I held the baby close, I felt a strange tug of uncertainty in my chest. Something told me there was still one more truth waiting to be uncovered. And when Clara mentioned a name I'd never heard before, the name of someone who had helped her hide all this time, a spark of unease flickered inside me. Diane decides to take a DNA test to confirm everything, but what she learns next changes her life once more. The test results came back, and they confirmed everything beyond doubt. When I got the call from the clinic, I could barely speak. My heart was pounding so loud it drowned out the nurse's words, but I caught the one sentence that mattered most. The test confirms a 99.9% match. The child is your biological grandson. For a few moments, I couldn't breathe. Then, the tears came, not the tears of grief I'd grown used to, but tears of something new. Relief, love, maybe even peace. I thanked the nurse, hung up, and sat in silence, staring at the wall. It was official. Mark's legacy was still here, alive, breathing, smiling. A part of him hadn't been taken from me after all. Clara came by that evening. The moment she stepped into the kitchen, she saw the look on my face and froze. "Diane, what did they say?" I smiled through my tears and held out the envelope. "He's Mark's," I whispered. "He's ours." Her hand flew to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. She hugged me so tightly that we both started crying again, the baby between us giggling like he could sense the joy. For the first time in a long while, the house was filled with laughter, light, pure, healing laughter. Over the following weeks, things began to change. The house that had once felt haunted by silence was now alive again. Clara and the baby, she named him Ethan, moved into the spare room for a while. Just until she got back on her feet. I didn't mind. The sound of tiny footsteps, soft coos, and midnight feedings brought a warmth I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Sometimes, I'd sit in Mark's old armchair, holding Ethan as he drifted to sleep. His little chest would rise and fall against my shoulder. And I'd close my eyes, whispering, "You'll know who your father was. I'll make sure of it." Clara and I grew close, bound by love and shared loss. She told me more about Mark, the late nights they'd work together, how he'd talk about me constantly, how he'd light up every time she brought up family. I learned things about my son I never knew. It felt like I was rediscovering him through her stories. The community began to take notice too. After everything that had happened, the trial, the scandal, the loss, people treated me with a new kind of respect. Some offered apologies for believing Sabrina's lies, others brought casseroles, or flowers, or just quiet smiles of understanding. I didn't hold grudges. I'd learned life was too short for bitterness. Mr. Langford stopped by one afternoon with paperwork for the trust fund Mark had mentioned in his letter. "Everything's been finalized," he said. "You and the boy are fully secured." Mark was thorough. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes again. "He always was," I said. He smiled gently. "He'd be proud of you, Diane. Of how you handled all this." I walked him to the door, and as he left, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The storms were behind me now. The house, once filled with sorrow, had become a home again, full of laughter, baby toys, and the smell of warm milk and coffee. On quiet evenings, I'd sit on the porch with Margaret, rocking Ethan in my arms while the sun dipped below the horizon. Margaret would smile, shaking her head. "You've come full circle, Diane. From heartbreak to hope. That boy's got a guardian angel watching over him." I smiled. "I know. His daddy." Clara eventually started working part-time again, and we found a rhythm that felt like family. Not perfect, not easy, but real. On weekends, we'd visit Mark's grave, leaving fresh flowers and sometimes a toy for Ethan to give his daddy. One day, when he's older, I'll tell him the whole story, not of revenge or pain, but of love that survived it all. One night, after putting Ethan to bed, I walked through the house, turning off the lights. I paused by Mark's photo on the mantel, the one with him grinning in that carefree way that always made me smile. I touched the frame and whispered, "I kept my promise, sweetheart. I'm living. And your son will too." The baby stirred in his crib, making a soft sound that made me chuckle. I went to him, picked him up gently, and sat in the old rocking chair by the window. Outside, the moonlight poured in, silver and soft, wrapping us both in its glow. As Ethan's tiny hand curled around my finger, I felt something deep inside me, not pain this time, but peace. A quiet, steady peace that told me I'd finally come through the fire. As Diane rocks her grandson to sleep, she whispers, "You'll know your father's love because it never truly left us.